it's a year ago today that I last stood up. So I've turned on my smartphone and I have no idea what will come to mind, but I want to share some reflections. Wittgenstein, who was strange and beautiful and strange, said that there was a very natural relation between pain and suffering and its expression. In other words, that's the opposite idea of another idea that's really prominent in our culture, that pain is mysterious and inaccessible. It's actually an idea that's all too dominant in our medical system, which is why we really struggle to get behind the veil of objective, verifiable evidence and even begin to properly think of how a patient, especially a patient dealing with a complex illness, needs to be approached with testimonial credibility being given to them. That doesn't mean the patient is always right about their experience, even about their subjective experience. But it means that there's a natural connection between inside and outside, which means that humans have the capacity to understand other humans who are going through big shit. And so what that personally means for me is that on dates that matter to me, birthdays, or this anniversary of being in this very strange way wheelchair bound for the first time in my life for a year. And it's strange because I'm not wheelchair bound, I'm barely able to use my wheelchair, but it's a kind of a strange way of being wheelchair bound where I hope to be more wheelchair bound than I am. But on big days like today, I have this very, very natural empathy for everybody going through the same stuff. And that means I'm thinking of everybody close to me who is going through acute chronic illness, myalgic encephalomyelitis, long COVID, but not just. And then a little bit of an outer circle, right? I've been in the ME game for, almost quarter century now. So there's a lot of people who are sort of vaguely in the back of my mind who are going through this. And I'm also thinking of strangers, right? So many strangers whose needs are not grasped and not met and not on course to being grasped or met, either medically or politically and often even personally. So what emotions am I feeling on this anniversary? It's very difficult to process the consequence of acute illness if you are going through it, because you're basically still flying the plane, you're basically still the captain of the ship, and so you don't get that time off easily, because it's not as though you are sick 95% of the time and you get a 5% break. So processing this is very, very difficult, especially if you have as limited a functional window as I do. It's a huge window compared to some patients with long COVID and ME, but it's very small compared to others. I work from bed an hour or two a day. So I think that at the 9-month point, about 3 months ago, I began to notice behaviors of mine which indicated acceptance. I would do something that I wouldn't normally do. For example, 3 months ago, I watched some really crap movies, which is really rare for me because I basically behave like I'm a busy CEO. I am able to watch a film, but it's very rare and it better be damn good. I'm not going to watch a film about sharks or earthquakes or the end of the world or nuclear war most of the time. But I indulged and I watched light films like that. And that was me accepting what's happened to me. That was me finding a moment where I wasn't particularly unwell, that I could watch a film, but I also wasn't well enough to do anything much more demanding than watch a film. And so I relaxed into that moment and allowed myself to enjoy something that was really particular to my capabilities, and indeed was the highlight of the day on a bad day. So it's difficult to accept that the highlight of your day on a less good day, but not a terrible day, could be that you watch a movie that you half like because you're not well enough to watch a movie you truly like. And I found myself really relaxing into a couple of experiences like that, and that is acceptance. That's acceptance. That's my mind becoming more at home in my body that has now changed. And anybody who, thinks psychoanalytically about the world will know that what it means to be at home in one's mind and what it means to be at home in one's body are very connected things. Now, something else that I'm experiencing is a sense that part of the uncertainty of what I'm going through is that I don't know where this is going. I mean, this could get worse. This could stay similar. This could be better and worse. This could improve. To what extent? Because what we're talking about really is microvascular damage post-COVID. We're not talking about all the sort of 10 and 20 physical and cognitive symptoms of me dramatically deteriorating for me. That's not what happened to me. Although my ME has got a little bit worse over recent months, the core problem I've got is that I got COVID a year and a half ago and sustained significant damage from it. And after some months, ended up staying for a month in hospital in an edge of life kind of way. In fact, edge of life situation was today, a year ago. My partner didn't know if I was going to make it or not. And what's that done basically is that every time I approximate even a quarter verticalization, putting my feet down very strongly on the ground, trying to gently begin to lift myself off the wheelchair on top of all the regular chest and breathing issues I have. It's like a sort of a spear that goes through my back and chest, and I suffocate for an indefinite period of time in a very, very unsafe way. It really is like a feeling of drowning. And so there is the uncertainty of that on a day-to-day basis, but there is also the uncertainty of where this is going, because you can't plan, but much more importantly, you don't have that sort of safety of being able to say, well, there is a 10% chance that this will happen, there is a 20% chance that that will happen, and there is a 40% that something else will happen. What I can say is that I'm facing two paradoxes. One paradox is that the medications that have a chance of helping me, even though I got a amazing letter from a consent form from one of my specialists saying that there was a 5% chance that a particular medication would significantly help me, and it comes with risks, and so am I going to be open to taking it? One of my paradoxes is that I'm not able to tolerate anywhere near high enough doses of the medications that stand the chance of being helpful. My second paradox is that I can't travel. I made one trip out in the last year to a very, very important musical event, and it was an ordeal. It was remarkable that I made it, but it was a 15-minute car trip with a wheelchair. And I tried to replicate it more recently, and it didn't work out. So I think that it's a problem that I can't travel because I can't do tests in the way I want. I do as many as I can from home. I also can't do any international travel to access things that might not be available in the UK. Now, I am seeing basically everybody who is a specialist in long COVID and microvascular damage in the UK context. I'm also seeing somebody in the United States remotely. I'm also seeing somebody in Germany. So at the level of the doctors around me, I've got pretty much a lot of the very best people in the world, and there's only a couple of handfuls of them. So it's not like if I were Bill Gates, I'd have radically different doctors. But nevertheless, there are so many options, and a lot of these options are, with a percentage attached to them, that they might be helpful, and some risks attached, and none of these percentages look terrifically good. But still, there's a lot to keep track of, and you basically almost need a full-time medical personal assistant to keep all of that stuff rolling. I'm basically too sick to facilitate my own healthcare because there's too many complex decisions that need to be made. Most of it falls to my partner, who is actually working while living with long COVID, while looking after me. She's working mostly from home for the BBC because she's had long COVID for over 3 years, but she's closer to a healthy person than to me. If we put that scale up, she's far from being a healthy person, but she's closer to a healthy person than to me. And it was amazing when she got sick 4 years ago, of course, because it was just a shock, because I was the sick one in the relationship. And there was a period of a year or year and a half where she was worse than me. And that was when I carried on talking to the beautiful community on YouTube, but I was sometimes just sitting there saying things about politics, but I sometimes struggled to be there because I was so traumatized that she'd got sick to the point that she couldn't tolerate any food, had to be on food substitutes, couldn't tolerate any sound, any light for months and months and months. But she made an amazing improvement. By the way, if you grow up in the Soviet Union, you get traumatized with lots of superstition. So that's the little knock for the degree to which my partner is still sick but improved. Now, in all of this, there's also something I've been very lucky about, and that of course is my mental health. And I've been able to prop up a community of tens and actually at times low hundreds of thousands of people who are healthy, unlike me for the most part, but are freaking out about the black cloud circling above in the political world and in the culture at large. That's been a blessing, but I've only been able to do that because I am just constitutively very, very lucky with my mental health. And that's something that can always go away, because while I'm somebody who could not in a psychological way slip, it's just I'm just too robust and too in love with the world for that. And indeed, one of the strengths that I think makes a difference when people are propped up by me online politically is that you know how grounded I am, and you know that you can lean on me, because if we are watching a sunset and then suddenly, instead of setting, the sun begins to rise, I am the 1 in a million person who is not going to have an elevated heart rate about this and will be able to react in a warm but also stable way to the order of nature breaking down. And so you lean on me. But that's, as I say, very largely for reasons that are outside of my control, this capacity I have and this externality that I have. Of course, there is a lot of faking going on, in the sense of faking the physical. And I know that Christopher Hitchens used to talk about this at the end of his life when he was dying. But he still pushed himself to do a lot of events, and he sort of masqueraded how sick he was and pretended he was well than he was. This business of faking normalcy is a very big part of acute chronic illness. And I do that very often, because 1 in 3 chats are really difficult for me physically. They're not difficult emotionally, they're difficult physically. It's difficult to focus and to concentrate when violent things and things that border on making you feel unsafe are happening in your body. So there is then also, of course, a political dimension to this, that one way to climb me out of this is to invest a couple of billion in long COVID. Now, unfortunately, as we know from our other political conversations, our societies do not have the capacity to do what seemingly seems to be in their interest, right? We're losing much more money on people with myalgic encephalomyelitis and long COVID not being able to participate in the economy than we would lose if we invested a few billion. I mean, we're losing probably annually more money on these folks than it would cost to largely fix these illnesses. So it's completely economically irrational. And now think about this, right? How freaky my work is, right? Most human beings cannot find themselves a job that's 2 hours a day working from their bed, right? You can't do most things in the labor market like that. So of course, if I were in a different predicament, I wouldn't be able to work given my current health. I think that a lot of my content, and I'm beginning to think in these terms more, is actually about hope. A lot of my political content is about hope. Partly because I do think that hope is predicated on a certain kind of unflinching truthfulness. I still get an enormous amount of pushback from folks in the beautiful community for being too pessimistic about this or that scenario, this or that prognosis. But it's worse for your nervous system. It's more scary, it's more untethering if you have an optimism that isn't sustained by reality, because you're going to be very punished by that. Your nervous system will be punished by that. The most robust kinds of optimism and hope, which are not the same thing, are based on the avoidance of evasion. And while I myself never need to try to be more hopeful about politics, because I'm very hopeful about politics, and I have never had a single sort of existentially pessimistic thought about politics in my life. That's also something, of course, I'm very lucky about, because I'm so in love with human beings as they are, and what are the distinct human activities is to lead a political life. Another one that I'm deeply interested in is the human activity of leading an ethical life. That's a little bit less of a clear activity, because where your ethical life ends and other kinds of bits of your life begin, aesthetic bits of your life, is not a clear boundary. With politics, there is a clearer, still not that clear, but there's a clearer boundary, right? On the whole, right, when you are, engaged in playing sport or painting, you're not engaged in politics. These distinctions are a little less clear with the ethical, but I have never had a moment in my life where I have been dispirited by politics in general. I've been dispirited by particular political events, but I've never been dispirited by politics itself. But now, even though political hope is very easy for me, and you know that because you lean on it, I'm being challenged to be hopeful about my health. And actually, when I have my medical appointments, my partner usually joins, and she does a little transcription, because I forget everything that I need to ask and everything that I am told to think about and try. But at the end of a lot of our medical appointments, my partner just interrupts and asks my specialist, one of my specialists we're talking about, to say something. Hey, say something to Vlad, because he kind of feels like he's never gonna walk again. And I have mixed feelings about this, but I do think that it's been really difficult in two ways, because it's not just that I can't stand up, it's that the border, the boundary between sitting down and standing up is so violent. In other words, it's not that I'll try to stand up, I'll fail, and it'll just show that I can't stand. It'll be that all kinds of violent stuff happens, and coping with it also will bring violence into one's mind, right? When there's a lot of violent symptoms in the body, one processes it, right? And one experiences it as being sort of assailed or sinking or sort of falling or being on fire or floating through space, but in some kind of unlovely way. There are lovely ways of floating through space. And there's this amazing interiority, of course, you experience when you're ill for a very, very long time and you're dealing with a lot of things in the body. A lot of things that are viscerally real but you can't see. I think for me, but also for a big subgroup of patients, it's quite common to visualize a certain kind of black space, which is not a negative space. It's a space in which you're precarious, but there is also beauty and possibility. But I think what's been really difficult is the violence of that boundary. In other words, that standing up could be life-threatening to me, and that if I were in a life-threatening situation, it would not be clear what medically a hospital could do except giving me 15 liters of oxygen. And so it's a very, very different thing when you can't stand with this violent boundary to a situation where you simply can't stand because you can't stand, but if you try, you'll just fail and you won't be able to stand, and that'll be the end of it. But that you explore that boundary, and even the gentlest exploration of that boundary comes with unbelievable risk. And uncertainty. That's difficult. Of course, there is always a very important concept when you're very seriously and in life generally, which is a concept that a lot of our self-help culture actually mitigates against, and that's spending, metaphorically, money you don't have. And so, of course, I have light ways of doing that when I overindulge with certain things, but another way of doing it is to make infinitesimal gestures towards standing up, and then be punished for it. But push it only a little so that you're punished a certain amount, but not too much. I do that from time to time. I do like to forget myself in the wheelchair. I love forgetting myself in the wheelchair. In fact, the very best moments for me often come when I forget myself in the wheelchair. But the truth is that while I set a sensational record of being 3 hours in the wheelchair about a few months ago, on most days, like the day that's just gone or the day that's just going to begin, I'm restricted. I'm kind of in the 15-minute plus range, 15 to 30-minute range in the wheelchair per day, that I begin to plummet health-wise if I spend more time in the wheelchair. So it's actually, quite frankly, that in the proper sitting position, I can't sit. In a proper sitting position, I can't sit sustainably. So there we go. Of course, in the first 6 to 9 months, I made progress, and I stabilized very considerably in the horizontal position. I've had fewer episodes of an extreme kind. I mean, it was otherworldly and totally nightmarish, my experience in hospital, my experience being out of hospital for the first few months. But I've been more stable recently, fewer episodes where you feel radically unsafe and you can't breathe and so on. But at the level of verticalization, it's been a very, very difficult, very, 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 very difficult obstacle. So I haven't decided where I'm going to put this on the Vlad's Me Diary channel or on the chat channel. I might put it on the chat channel. If I put it on the chat channel, then to all of you who are sick, I am sending positive energy. And to all of those of you who are healthy, you send me positive energy and wish me to experience with less violence a little bit of extra verticalization. And in exchange, I'm going to baby you around a little bit, because politics is scary. Lots of love and talk very, very soon.